Hey guys, thanks for joining me for part two of our series on industrialization. We're going to be focusing in on the technology involved in industrialization. So our essential question, how did technology shape economic production between 1750 and 1900? If you're talking about industrial technology, it's a quick conversation regarding this. This is at a museum in Edinburgh, Scotland. This is the Watt steam engine. Steam engine absolutely revolutionized world history. It used the power of coal, heating water, driving an engine that could power any machine regardless, and this is the key point, regardless of the geography. It did not have to be near a river. So if you were in an area, a country that did not have the opportunity to be blessed with great river systems, this machine was going to change the dynamic for you. It could be used to power vessels. It could be used to power a cotton gin, a loom, a spinning jenny. There's nothing that this machine would not be able to do. And ultimately, this technology was transitioned into rail. And this is one of the earliest railroad devices. I'm hesitant to call this a railroad car, but this is a device that is called the rocket. And this machine, the first known railroad that we have, this machine traveled at a stunning 3 miles an hour. And unfortunately, the person who would be the passenger would be here, would be unfortunately covered in the ash and soot from the coal, which is coming out of this engine right here. Obviously, the design required substantial improvement, but this train, cleverly named the Rocket, is one of the first. And as you can see, they don't stray that far from the original design. Ultimately, they do move the stack behind the engineer, which certainly makes their job quite a bit cleaner and safer. This map shows us the progression of rail development throughout England, which, as we know from our previous work, is the leader in global industrialization. And you can see here as industrialization is in its infancy, and here at the beginning of World War I, how much the landscape and countryside of England has changed. Here's the same perspective throughout the entire world. I'll put myself in the middle of the Atlantic right here. And you can see the rail lines webbing across the globe. Those parts of the world that, again, industrialization difficult or impossible, the Sahara, the Amazon, the Arctic regions of Russia, Mongolia, Australian deserts, the Arctic Circle up here. Obviously, these areas are inhospitable to rail development. So when you look at some of the areas that have maybe fewer rail lines, here in sub-Saharan Africa, New Guinea, and Oceania, not really conducive for that technology. And those countries, again, are going to be far behind as a result. A couple other key innovations: iron. Iron is obviously a workable, malleable metal that is produced from harnessing something called coke, which is a byproduct of coal. And this was crucial to the rail industry and ultimately the industry of steel as well. I think the second industrial revolution is really fueled by this cat over here. He's not Isaac Newton, but he's not far behind. Isaac Newton created this mindset that the universe could be understood. Thomas Edison created this mindset that the universe could, in a sense, be harnessed, and through technology, through innovation. Thomas Edison, his prolific nature of innovation is something we've never really seen before. Frankly, he's just in terms of being prolific. He's even more prolific, for example, than Newton. He averaged one patent every 8 days, and he averaged one major patent, something like electricity, phonograph, etc., every 6 months. It's just unheard of from his lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey. So his innovations in light and electricity, for reasons that don't require an explanation, certainly drove industrialization. Henry Bessemer developed the technology behind producing steel, and what a significant achievement that was. Again, as I mentioned with Edison, there's really no way to completely calculate or personify all of what his innovations did as far as driving industrialization. We also need to mention in 1876 Alexander Graham Bell's innovation, the telephone. Certainly primitive by modern standards, but the ability to communicate over long distances changed the calculus of history. So the next question is, what is the role of government in this industrial process? Certainly the British supported industrialization. We mentioned that in Unit 5.3. But what are some of the other examples of that? And the best example, it's actually one of my favorite things to study throughout world history, is the Japanese industrial process, which is just phenomenal. Japan, which had been isolated really throughout much of the 17th through the 19th century, gradually starts to open up into global trade, sort of unwillingly actually, after an American sea captain named Matthew Perry, not the one from Friends, shows up and threatens Japan to engage in trade. Now, rather than run from that, rather than run from their technology, the Japanese looked at their technology and like, okay, you got us. We don't have iron-sided steamships. We don't have machine guns. So we can either learn from it or we can resist it. They chose to learn from it. Whereas at the same time, and again, it's going to be a focus of a future unit, the Chinese resisted it to their peril. Whereas the Japanese sent students abroad to study engineering and technology. They took all of the swords away from the samurai class, and instead they put them in charge of industry. If you think about it, what a remarkable industrial leader. If you were to put somebody who spent their entire life focusing on hard work and loyalty, and now you put them in charge of a factory with their fierce drive to succeed, it's again not a huge surprise, that we see things like this. This is from the AP exam a few years ago, and the theme that was being addressed in this question is that Japan westernized. You can see it in the attire, you can see it in the beards, you can see it in the short trimmed hair being adorned by the men, which was a departure from the Japanese past. Japan westernized. I think this is the best example, though. If you know anything about Japan, they play great baseball over there. Baseball is their national pastime. They love baseball, and they adopted baseball as their own in the early 1900s, and they started to play with competitive teams, much like the one seen in this photograph. And the Japanese state encouraged this. They encouraged the rail lines. They made reforms that reflected a modern nation. And by the dawn of World War II, we certainly know they were a formidable modern nation because they did all of the things listed here. They created schools, they modernized the military, they got rid of feudalism, they built railroads, they nurtured and subsidized industrialization. these are the types of things that had to happen for a state to be successful. And as we're going to see as kind of a point of contrast, these are things that did not happen in China. And you can see from this data set, which you can probably tell from the font and the nature of it, this was on an AP test. The Japanese were remarkably successful. And when you look at the earliest years, they're exporting, such a small amount of manufactured goods early, and they're importing far more. Exporting, going out, import, you're bringing in. So they're bringing in more manufactured goods. And look at how over time that changes. Okay? Instead, they're bringing in raw materials. What are raw materials being used for? Iron and wood and stuff. It's being used to fire the engines of industrialization. So they go from importing almost no raw materials. Hey, we need more raw materials. We need cotton. We need coal. We need wood, etc. It's a sign that they've industrialized. And look at the change in the exports. The exports more than double. Okay, if you are exporting raw materials, you're not producing. If you're importing raw materials, you're producing. And that's what's demonstrated in this very powerful graphic. All right, our last series is going to be on 5.7 through 5.9, and we'll address that in the coming days. Thank you for joining me for this presentation.